This is a podcast from the BBC. To find out more, go to bbc.co.uk/podcasts.
Welcome to the News Pod, recorded at 16 hours GMT on Friday the 5th of December. Here in Britain, an official report has criticised the way a government-owned company working in international development is run. The company, CDC, started life as the Colonial Development Corporation in 1948. It's now a fund management business that invests in private businesses in poor countries. It's owned by the taxpayer and accountable to DFID, the Department for International Development. Its financial performance has been relatively strong, but questions have been raised by the National Audit Office about how accountable it is and whether its chief executive should be paid an annual salary of £1 million or $1.5 million. Edward Lee is an opposition politician and the chairman of the Commons Public Accounts Committee. Evan Davis put it to him that CDC was a good thing. It's performed well financially, takes no money from government and invests in poor countries.
Well, you're right. Its financial performance is quite strong. It seems to be well run. There's one worry that it appears to have £1.4 billion kept in cash in the UK, which is more than it actually disperses. It seems to be dispersing quite a lot of money to countries like China or South Africa, which are not the poorest of the poor countries. And also my criticism of it is what is happening to these performance bonuses to its staff. We own this company. This is not a private company. DFID entirely owns it. Do we need to pay the chief executive £970,000 a year?
Isn't that just a reflection of the financial performance, though, which, as the National Audit Office recognises, has been quite strong? It's sort of turned around, hasn't it? I think since 2004 it's been particularly strong.
Well, I think this is probably part of the problem, that DFID may have taken its eye off the ball. It may have created a bonus structure which rewards strong financial performance. And, of course, you can achieve strong financial performance in the international development world if you put your money in relatively strong economies. But how much of their money and their effort has been going into the poorest of the poor? This is why we have DFID. This is why we have the CDC. We want to help the poorest of the poor. And I think that paying an income of nearly £1 million to somebody who works in an entirely publicly owned company is an insult to the millions of people who are living on $1 a day and the tens of thousands of charity workers who are slaving away, dedicated people on tiny salaries. Of course pay him well. I'm all in favour of good salaries, and apparently the initial salary was $400,000 a year, which was agreed with DFID. That would be perfectly reasonable. But to pay nearly £1 million, I think, is unnecessary, and I suspect that these performance bonuses have skewered the effort of the company into more successful countries rather than the poorest of the poor.
So it actually sounds, and this is an interesting thing for a Conservative MP to be saying, it actually sounds like it's behaving a little bit too much like a private company, when what you're really saying is it needs to be less commercial about what it does, perhaps thinking about investing in the really poorest of countries, even if that isn't going to generate quite as good a return as investing in China or India or somewhere, and not paying itself like it was a private company. It's sort of stuck between, if you like, the full commercial sector and the proper place in the public sector.
Well, of course, you've put your finger on it, and I thought that we had all agreed that that was going to be the new ideology of DFID. It wouldn't just invest in Pergau dams in commercial projects. Most of its effort would now go in helping the poorest of the poor. And if that wasn't commercially the best thing for this country to do in all circumstances, so be it. That's why we have an international development department. Now, if the whole ethos is now going back to just saying, we're going to be entirely commercial and we're going to put our money into places like South Africa and China or India, which are not, frankly, the poorest of the poor, then, let's know about it. But at the same time, I do think we want a sense of proportion in the public sector. We want to go back to the days of a public sector ethos where if you work in an entirely publicly owned company, of course you've got to be sensible, commercial, professional, the rest of it. But you realise that you have a certain sense of security and you don't pay yourself huge salaries of £1 million a year. If you want to do that, you go into the private sector and you become an entrepreneur.
Conservative MP Edward Lee.